Hi, good evening. This public forum on redistricting for single member District 5 is now called to order at 6 p.m. on Monday, April 4th, 2022, for the purposes stated in the notice for tonight's board meeting. Do we have any board members present? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I wish to extend a warm welcome to everyone here who's joining us virtually and all those who's joining us in person. A special thanks to Dr. Leah Nutt for hosting this forum here at the Tomball College. Thank you. Our first order of business is a presentation by our legal and demographic team concerning what redistricting is. The role census data plays in redistricting. This is the census data for the 2010 and 2020 and initial proposed maps. Ms. McBride, if you may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Chair Saldivar. We're so happy to be here tonight. And as the chair said, tonight we're going to be talking about what redistricting is, as well as looking at some proposed maps. If we can go to the first slide, we'll go over really briefly sort of our objectives, our takeaways from tonight's presentation. First, as a sort of framing exercise, we'll provide a legal overview regarding redistricting, which will answer all the W questions having to do with redistricting, why, what, when, and also how we redistrict. And that will be sort of the frame or the picture frame, if you will, through which we will look at this process and then begin talking about the critical piece of data that we need regarding redistricting, which is census data that tells us how our population has changed over the decade. And based on that population change, we may be legally required to respond. So we'll first tell you what is that threshold that requires a response, what that response is, and then any limitations on our response. Our response is rebalancing population, because that's what redistricting essentially is. Yes, it's redrawing a map or redrawing a line, but when you move a line between single member districts, you're really moving people into one single member district and out of another in order to balance population. And as you might imagine, we've got 9 single member districts in the Lone Star College system, and there's more than one way to achieve near equal balance amongst all of our single member districts, but there's some constraints on how we do that. So after talking about whether or not we have to respond, we'll talk about some of those constraints, the consent decree that we're under, as well as map drawing principles, otherwise known as redistricting criteria adopted by the board. And with that background, then we'll look at the proposed maps, and then we'll look to the future. We'll look at the timeline and our immediate next steps. So now let's jump in with a legal overview that will begin to lay that foundation before we talk about the population change analysis, constraints on rebalancing, and then the proposed maps. So first to our legal overview, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Paige Martin, to provide the legal overview.
Thank you, Lisa. So for the legal overview, we want to answer 4 simple questions: what, why, when, and how. So the first question, what? What is redistricting? Well, the technical definition is it's the process by which the boundaries of elective districts or single member districts are periodically redrawn in response to changes in population. How do we know what the changes in population are? Well, every 10 years, the federal government conducts a census. There was one in 2010. We just did one in 2020. There'll be another one in 2030 on the even numbered years every 10 years. And then in the following odd number year, the government releases that data to states and local government entities and other entities like Lone Star College. And then those entities have to decide, do we have to respond to the census data based on the laws that govern us? So Lone Star College system is currently divided into 9 single member districts. And you can see on the screen that this is the current single member district map. It was originally drawn in 2013. And you can see that not all the districts are the same size. For example, single member district 7 is very large. It's much larger than some of the smaller districts like 3 and 4. But when we are thinking about balancing the single member districts, we're not talking about physical size. We're talking about total population. And so when that map was drawn in 2013, the total population in single member district 7 was substantially equivalent to the populations in the smaller districts like 3 and 4. So we have 9 single member districts in the Lone Star College system, and these are the 8 current trustees on the board. There is a vacancy in single member district 7. But the redistricting process is very important to these current trustees, as well as you members of the public, and I'll explain why. So for the current trustees, they are charged with representing the interest of their single member district. And when we talk about redistricting, we're talking about redrawing the boundary lines. And so we're moving populations in and out of the single member districts. And so the trustees need to know where the boundary lines are so they know whose interests they're representing. As for you, the public, you want to know who's your representative and what member district your residence is in so that you know who to vote for. You know the candidates that you need to get to know and who to vote for when it comes time to vote. So the entire board is driving this redistricting process. But there's a smaller committee within the board known as the Redistricting Committee that has a laser focus to make sure that this redistricting process is done well. And that committee is composed of Trustee Mike Sullivan from single member District 8. He's the chair, and he's joined on the committee by single member District 2 Trustee Ms. Ernestine Pierce and Trustee Art Murillo from single member District 4. And that redistricting committee is meeting periodically to consider the feedback, not only from individual trustees, but also from you, the public, that we're receiving in these community forums as well as online. And the committee then considers the feedback and the maps, and then takes recommendations back to the larger board that impact the next iteration of map drawing. And so the committee met 2 weeks ago. They're going to meet again next week to consider all the feedback and then make recommendations for the next iteration of map drawing. So why do we redistrict? Well, the trigger is found in state law. What tells us we have to redistrict is in the education codes, it says if the census data indicates that the population of the most populous district exceeds the population of the least populous district by more than 10%, then we have to engage in the redistricting process. That's the why we do it. The trigger is in state law that says the most populous district, the population of the most populous district and the least populous district can't be greater than 10%. State law also gives us a timeline for when we have to complete the redistricting process. So not later than the 90th day before the day of the first regular trustee election at which trustees may officially recognize and act on the last preceding federal census data. That's the timeline. So the Lone Star College system has elections on even numbered years. So the first trustee election that we could act on this new census data is November 8, 2022. So the law says that we have to be done with the redistricting process by August 10th. But that August 10th date is sandwiched in between 2 other important dates for the Lone Star College system. The first day that candidates can start applying to be on the November ballot is mid-July. And the last date for candidates to apply to be on the ballot is mid-August. And so the board really wanted to complete the redistricting process before the first day so that people in mid-July could know where the boundary lines are and where they would need to reside in order to represent a specific district. So the board has adopted a timeline that Lisa will talk about later that says we're going to complete the redistricting process by the end of June. And that gives us plenty of time, and we will comply with that statutory absolute deadline of August 10th. So how do we redistrict? Well, we've mentioned that redistricting means redrawing the boundary lines of elective districts in order to rebalance the population, to make sure that the population in each district is relatively equivalent. And so that's one constraint on our map drawing, but there are additional constraints, both legal and practical, that are going to impact the way that we redraw these boundary lines. And we'll talk more about the other legal and the practical complaints a little bit later. So I've mentioned the census. What does the census report? Well, it reports several different population measures: total population, voting age population, and citizen voting age population. And this next slide has a more formal definition of each of those categories. But the important thing to remember is for the total population, that's a direct count number. So that is based on how people actually filled out the census form. And it's all persons in a specific jurisdictional district. So from 0 to the oldest, living person in the district, that counts towards the total population. And that's a direct count number. The second one is voting age population, and another direct count number, the number of persons on April 1st, 2020, who were 18 years of age or older in that specific jurisdiction. And that's another direct count number that the census gives us. The last one is citizen voting age population, the number of persons who are 18 years of age or older who are citizens in the jurisdiction. And that's calculated using survey data over a period of time. So the census data doesn't ask whether you're a citizen or not, but there are surveys and additional ways that to estimate how many people over the age of 18 are also citizens and therefore eligible to vote in the election. And that citizen voting age population, it could vary. It's not a direct count, it's an estimate. So it could vary from, the number that the census gives us could be, it could vary from anywhere from 0.01% to as many as 5 probably. But that's what we have to use. And that's an important, that's the statistic that we use when we talk about some of these criteria that limit the way that we are going to redraw the boundary lines that we're going to discuss later. So total population, voting age population, and citizen voting age population are all numbers that we get from the census, and very important when we're talking about redrawing the boundary lines. So when we're talking about redrawing the boundary lines, the question we want to ask is, are the single member districts well balanced? And we answer that by making sure that they are drawn with substantially equal population, not exactly equal, but substantially equivalent. We want to avoid overpopulated and underpopulated districts and make sure that they're substantially equivalent, the populations in each single member district. And to help you think about that, if you can imagine a pie, and one side of the pie has 1,000 people on it, and the other side of the pie has 100 people on it. And if you're really excited about the election and you have a candidate you really want to elect, you would rather be on the side with 100 people because your vote would be stronger. You would have greater voting power if you were on the side of the pie with less people. You wouldn't want to be on the side with 1,000 people because your voting power wouldn't be as great. Now, none of the single member districts in the Lone Star College system are that disparate, but that's just an example of when we talk about balancing out the district, we're trying to equalize or normalize the power of one vote in every single district. So now I want to turn it over to our demographer, Rocky Gardner, and he's going to talk about, we mentioned the trigger is that 10% analysis. Is the population in the most populous district greater than 10% and greater than the population of the least populous district? And Rocky's going to talk about that now.
Thank you, Paige. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back, kind of, to some extent. So we're going to start just by looking at 2010, just so we have a point of reference. So the 2010 totals for Lone Star College, we had about 1,786,000 persons. And that's an average of almost 200,000 persons per district. So that's kind of the sweet spot there. And when the boundaries were finished, I think in 2012, 2013, That differential was 7.3%, with your smallest district being District 4 at 190,000, and then District 9 with just over 204,000. And as part of that, we also look at your districts of opportunity or influence districts. And back in 2010, we had District 3, which was almost 60%. I'm sorry, almost 50% Hispanic and African American together, as was District 6. Those were both influence districts, and District 4 was over 50% Hispanic, so they were considered an opportunity district. You can see there, just for point of reference, District 2 was very close to 50% African American Hispanic, so almost an influence district there. If we fast forward to 2020, and you see that now we've added over almost 300,000 persons. We're at 2,262,909 persons. Our average has jumped up to 250,000 per district. District 4 remained your smallest district at 202,000, but you can see that District 1 is now the largest district with 279,000 persons, a 38.2% differential. So when Paige was just talking about the work at hand, we are well over 10%. So redistricting is required, and you can see there that we've got 4 districts with close to or over 270,000 persons. So we have a good bit of moving to do, given that 3 and 4 are only at 209 and 202,000 respectively. Now, if we call our attention to the CVAP, or the area there in yellow, we still have districts 3 and District 6 that are well over 50% African American and Hispanic, which made them an influence district. District 2 went over almost to 60% during this time period. They're also a district of influence. And then District 4 remained high at Hispanic with 56.7%. So they're a district of opportunity. So I wanted to point that out, in that we need to try to hold on to each one of those, the 3 influence districts and the opportunity district, when we redraw and bring districts back in the 10% threshold. Next slide. This next slide, I think, just jumps into the change, almost 500,000 person growth. You can see there that, we had 4 districts that added over 70,000 persons in growth. Districts 3 and District 4, your small districts that did not add as many, that they both added 14 and 11,000. But the big changes that we saw were a decline in the share of Anglo population. You can see there that District 2, District 3, 4, and 6 all declined in Anglo populations, but your other districts also declined in the share of Anglo populations, while your Hispanic and your Asian shares and your African American shares all increased during this same time. Next slide. So if we look at District 5 specifically, District 5 was 202,000 in 2010, had jumped to 272,000 and 601 by 2020. So that was 70,000 additional persons. Again, they're about 20,000 persons over our average. So this is definitely a district that we have to remove population in order to balance the other districts. So your population in District 5 will be able to pull some population down through District 9 and be able to populate those districts to the south. So the key takeaways here, that the college added almost 500,000 persons in the 10 years from 2010 to 2020. The overall population, 2,262,847 persons. Total population differential between most and least populous exceeds 10%. It's now 38.2%. Your most populous district changed from District 9 in 2010 to District 1 in 2020, although District 4 remained the least populous district, and redistricting is now required. We're beginning that now.
Thank you, Rocky. Now I'd like to talk about, I mentioned earlier that the 10% rule is the trigger, but there's some additional constraints when we think about redrawing the boundary lines that we have to keep in mind when we're drawing those lines. And the first one is the consent decree. So back in 2013, a group of plaintiffs sued Lone Star College system, alleging that the at-large method of electing trustees resulted in African-American and Latino citizens having less opportunity than Anglo citizens to participate in the political process and elect candidates of their choice. So the college did not concede liability under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, but did agree to discontinue the at-large district system and have single-member districts. And in addition to dividing into single-member districts, the college also agreed to these two provisions of the consent decree. The first one is that in one of the single-member districts, Latino citizens would constitute a majority of the citizen voting age population residing in that district. So there's that term, citizen voting age population. That's why that statistic is so important, because it helps us make sure we're complying with these two provisions in the consent decree. So the district in which the Latino citizens would constitute a majority of the citizen voting age population, that's what's known as an opportunity district. And we currently have an opportunity district, which is single member district 4. The next provision in the consent decree was that African Americans and Latinos would have significant voting influence in at least 2 other districts. And those districts are known as influence districts. And so that means that the CVAP of African American population and Latino population combined have to be the majority population in the single member district or greater than 50%. And so when the map was drawn in 2013, like I said, single member district 4 was the opportunity district, and single member districts 2 and 6 were the influence districts. When the census data came out in 2020, based on the current map, single member district 3 was also an influence district. And so now we have 1 opportunity district in single member district 4 and 3 influence districts in 2, 3, and 6. And so we have to make sure that we continue, as we redraw the boundary lines, that we continue to comply with this consent decree, because that's a legal requirement. The next constraints we're going to talk about are what's known as redistricting criteria. And these were adopted by the board when they decided to engage in this redistricting process and make a timeline and redistricting criteria by which we would follow in this process. And some of these are going to sound familiar to you because they're based on the state and federal requirements that we've already mentioned, but the other ones that you haven't heard of are more practical. What are the practical constraints that we need to consider when we are redrawing the boundary lines? And so the first one is easily identifiable geographic and political boundaries shall be followed when possible. That means that geographical boundaries like rivers and lakes and major highways are going to be used to make the boundaries, so that we're not just creating these random boundary lines. We want to respect the geographic boundaries of communities and also the political boundaries, and political meaning communities of interest, but also election precincts and that are already established. So as much as possible, we want to use geographic and political boundaries that are already there when we're talking about we're thinking about redrawing the boundary lines. Criteria 2 and 3 are going to be familiar to you. We've already talked about them. So number 2 is single member district shall be nearly as practicable of equal population in terms of total population according to the 2020 census. We're trying to balance out the total population in each single member district. And number 3, the district shall keep the total deviation between the largest and smallest single member district at or within 10%. And there's that trigger we talked about from state law that it was adopted by the board as a map drawing criteria. Number 4, single member districts shall be compact to the extent possible and composed of contiguous territory. So compact has 2 components. When we talk about compact, we mean shape-wise compact, physically compact, in that we don't want to have random arms and legs and small, extensions of districts as part of the map, because that usually means that we are focusing on one criteria above all others, and getting this weird extension. So we want to stay away from that as much as possible, but also politically compact, again, in that we don't want to separate communities of interest, existing precinct boundaries, and those sorts of things. Contiguous territory. We want our map to be contiguous, which means we don't want there to be holes. We want the member districts to be adjacent to each other. So if you think of the contiguous 48 states, you can put your pencil down and trace the entire outline of the states without picking your pencil up. And that's what we would like for our final single member district map to be contiguous, so that there's no holes in the middle. Number 5, single member districts shall preserve incumbent constituency relations by placing the residents of existing trustees in separate single member districts. Again, this is not a legal requirement, it's more of a practical requirement, but we don't want to redraw the line so that 2 existing trustees reside in the same district. Once we get the final map, we don't want to have existing trustees residing in the same district. Number 6, where possible, the proposed map shall maintain communities of interest within single member districts, and attempts should be made to avoid splitting neighborhoods when redrawing the single member district lines. And that's where we need your help as the public, because we want to, we can see geographical boundaries and that sort of thing, but we want to hear from you. Are we splitting a community of interest or a neighborhood such that we are dividing members of the population that have similar interest and would be well represented by a single trustee on the board of Lone Star College? So we need your feedback to make sure that we comply with that criteria. Number 7, single member districts shall be drawn to avoid splitting county election precincts to the extent possible. So we want to be a good election partner. We don't want people to have to go to 2 different election precincts to vote for Lone Star College trustees, and then have to go to another one to vote for other members of local government. So we want to avoid splitting county election precincts to the extent possible. Again, not a legal requirement, but more of a practical requirement. Criteria 8 is sort of a general statement of what the consent decree requires. And that is, once we have established a minority voting population in a specific area, we want to make sure that we don't redraw the map. And as you can see at the very bottom of that, we want to avoid retrogression of minority voting rights by drawing a plan where minority voting strength is not diminished relative to the existing plan. So we don't want to go backwards as far as the strength of the CVAP for minority populations in our single member districts. And lastly, number 9, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We're going to keep existing single member district boundaries shall be preserved to the extent possible. So the 2013 map that we showed you at the very beginning, that map was approved by the Department of Justice as well as the federal court. And so we don't really want to start all over again and just try to meet all the criteria with a random map. We want to keep the existing single member district boundaries as much as we can. No need to reinvent the wheel. So with that, we'll go ahead and shift to the proposed maps. And I want to, before we see the maps, I want to just remind you that as you're looking at these maps, about the criteria we've talked about. So imagine that you have a checklist, and as you're looking at these maps, the first thing you want to keep in mind is the 10% rule. So if the maps bring the population between the most populous district and the least populous district under that 10% amount, that gets a check. The map gets a check because that's the most important criteria. The second most important criteria is the consent decree. We want to make sure that we maintain single member district 4 as an opportunity district, and that we maintain single member districts 2, 3, and 6 as influence districts. So if the maps get those right, that's another check. And then finally, the redistricting criteria. Again, some of those aren't legally required, but they're practical. And so if you're on the fence between maps 1 and 2, think about the redistricting criteria, and the one that meets those criteria the best is probably the one you should support, just because it encompasses all of the legal and practical requirements for redrawing the maps. So I'm going to turn it over again to our demographer, Rocky Gardner, to show you the maps.
Thank you, Paige. So let's just start right into it, right? This is Plan 1. A couple things I want to point out first is that the blue outlines on these maps are the existing single member districts. So that's the way they look today. And where you see the color is where we've adjusted the plan to make a new plan, to make a new map. So where you see color bleeding over, for instance, in the northern east part there of 5, where it goes into 7, that means that District 5 is going to capture some of District 7. And I know you might be thinking, well, District 5 is supposed to be losing population. And this is true, but keep in mind, we're having to shift a lot of population south. So first, we're going to build District 5 up, and then you see the south there, we're going to remove population to District 9. So you can begin to see what's going on there. So we can go to the next slide, please. And so the result of Plan 1, you see a 9% differential. District 4, we've added population, bringing it up to 239,000. And District 9 is at 260,000. So again, 9%. We're right within average. So check that box, right? The boxes that Paige was wanting us to check there. We checked that first one. If we think about a district of opportunity, District 4, still over 50% Hispanic. Check another box. And then if you look at Districts 2, 3, and 6, they're each still over 50% when you combine the African-American and the Hispanic populations, citizen voting age populations. So there's is that 3 checks, or I don't know if you get 3 for that one or 1, but we get more checks there. So we've hit all of our checks. Next slide, please. And this is the opportunities that we had to move. So again, it's a lot of movement, but because we had to shift a lot of populations, those black circles represent areas where we had to move the population. You can zoom to I think a couple of these, right? Next slide. So in District 5, there were 2 spots. So to the north there, we shifted some population that went from 7 into 5, and then in the south there, we've shifted population from 5 into 9. I think we're going to zoom in on those now. So to the north, that's Lake Creek and the West Fork San Jacinto River there to the north. We moved that population down all into District 5 in this one. And next one. And then we use that, I think that's a Huffsmith Road, and it's that's another big word, Kukendall Huffsmith Road there across the top there. So that's what we did. We moved everything south of that in District 5 down into District 9. Again, this is just to move population later out of District 9. I think that's it. So basically, single District 5 gains population from 7, and it loses population to 9. Pretty straightforward there, getting it down around that 150,000 average. So let's look at Plan 2. Same story, second verse, just a little bit different. You can see there, and then if we look at the next slide, we'll just jump right to it. Yes, no, back to the other one. Back one slide, please. So you see how the black circles there are a little bit different. We did not, in this case, 7 moved population into 5. So we didn't we didn't go that direction. And at the bottom, then we dropped less population into District 9. So we'll begin to look at those next. We're actually missing a little black circle there. So our population that we're at 9.2% with this second plan. District 4 is a little bit larger than the first plan, but still 240,000. And now District 2 is the largest district with 262,000. That's a 9.2% differential. So still within our 10%, just like we want to be. Districts 2, District 3, and District 6 still exceed 50% population between the African-American and the Hispanic populations combined. And District 4 is at 52.3%, still over 50%. So District 4 is still a district of opportunity. With that. So again, we'll zoom into these 2 changes. So that the change there, you can see in black circles, we're going to zoom into those now. That's Research Forest Drive, Greenbridge Drive there that was in District 5 that we're shifting up to District 7 in this plan. population there is moved, and then that's Main Street going through Tomball. So Main Street, FM 2920, everything south of that in District 5 now gets moved down to District 9 in this plan. So District 5 loses population to District 7, and it loses population there to District 9 as well. So we removed that population that we needed to remove from District 5 by moving in two different places. So the map comparisons, I like this slide a lot because it basically combines everything. So again, 2010, 202,000. We added over 70,000 persons from 2010 to 2020. So we had to remove some population. So in Plan 1, the population drops to 258,000. And by Plan 2, it's at 254,000. So both right around that 250,000 number that allows them to stay within that 10% tolerance. You can see there that your shares of population, although they declined, your Anglo population did decline, their shares remained about the same in 2020 as they are in Plans 1 and Plans 2. They're pretty close across the board there with these plans. I think with that, we're going to go to questions about maps. Thank you.
Thank you, Rocky, for the presentation. At this moment, we will now open the floor for questions and comments from the public. If you're physically present, please come to the microphone to speak. If you're online, please use the raise your hand, and we'll make sure to get to you in just a couple of seconds.
Thank you for the incredible presentation. I've learned a lot and appreciate the work and all that's gone into that. Just one question I have or observation about the second map with the boundary line at 2920. That puts the college campus itself, which is north of 2920, in a different district than the rest of it separates that. So that's just an observation that maybe you already noted and perfectly fine, but that just wanted to share that's what stood out to me, that would put the campus in a different district than the town of Tomball.
So currently it's in District 9.
Currently it's in 5.
It's District 5.
Currently, and on the second option, that would keep the college in a district different from where the city of Tomball is located. Because with the Main Street barrier, we're north of that, more at Brown Road and above, and the rest of Tomball, or a lot of Tomball, will be separate. So that's just an observation. I'm not sure if that's important, but just wanted to make that note.
Thank you.
We really appreciate that. We have been working on comments that we have received from communities and trustees. So there is actually a map 3 where we've tried a couple of things, a map 4 where we've tried a couple of things, but they don't work, but we wanted to show that we tried them, and a map 5 and a map 6. And all of those have been considered by the Redistricting Committee and will be considered by the board at its meeting on the 21st. And so we will see if any of those changes impact what you've just discussed. I know the single member districts that were impacted the most by those maps were single member district number 8, single member district number 2, single member district number 3, 1, 4, and 6. So almost all of them, but not necessarily. Well, also a 9 because the border between 9 and single member district 6. So we'll see about that change, and that's very helpful. That is precisely the type of information that we're hoping to garner for these meetings. So thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, because that is a neighborhood or community of interest, the college being separated from the city or the population it serves. Although this doesn't affect who goes or serves a particular facility, but putting it in different, exactly. And yeah, so that's precisely the type of feedback we need. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good explanation.
Yeah.
Do you have any more questions? I do have a question for you, Rocky. In one of your earlier slides, you had mentioned a total district population of 2.2 million, are you referring to the college itself or District 5?
I'm sorry, yeah, that was the college itself. The overall population in 2020 of the college itself was 2,200,000 and it's not in front of me, 60 something thousand. I think, if I remember correctly, pretty
And
close.
District 5 was about at 270, and we had to bring it back down to about 250, 255 in order to
Right.
get down to that average. So it had to lose about 20,000 people. Is that right, Rocky? I'm not.
Yep,
looking at that.
that's real close. So we had to get it, we're shooting for that 250 number or close to it.
Okay, just double checking.
Yeah.
I think I knew it was referring to the system, but I just wanted to double check.
Right.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Our next item is discussion of timeline and next steps. Ms. McBride?
All right. So the next slide has the entire timeline on there for everyone. We're between the March 24th redistricting committee, where the redistricting committee considered the first round of comments from trustees and the public, and the April 13th meeting, which is the board special meeting on redistricting. So we've had several redistricting committee meetings. We've had one public education where we educated the public on the redistricting process, and we're finishing up our first round of individual community forums. Our last one is this Wednesday. We've done a forum in each single member district, or for each single member district. And so what we're aiming to do is, based on all of that information, trustee feedback, public education, community forum, and community feedback, either at the meetings or online, because you can submit your feedback online, to generate a new iteration of maps for the board's consideration. And the board will either authorize all of those to be presented publicly to solicit additional feedback, or just one of those. We're really moving through this process quickly and quicker than we thought we would, as a result of the hard work of the trustees and the redistricting committee, and the really good comments that we're getting from the administration at different events like this, as well as the community. So that's been very helpful, and it's really helping us get to a point of consensus much sooner than we thought we would. We built in some additional time into the timeline that we may not need, because we're really, coming to consensus in terms of what trustees want, what the community wants, and what the law requires. So after that April 13th meeting, we might be posting publicly one map or two maps, but the idea is to get as much community input on those maps before a public hearing, a central public hearing, where the board normally hosts its board meetings on June 8th, so that we can hear finally either on the one map or the two map, in order to make some final tweaks. After that June 8th meeting, we go back to the redistricting committee on the 16th to take in all that feedback, to make any additional tweaks that we need to make, and to present all that information to the board, the public comments, any additional tweaking the redistricting committee did on June 16th. And then on June 29th, the end of June, well in advance of that statutory deadline of August 10th, the board is set to finally adopt a map. So that puts us well in advance of the first day of the file for a candidate in the middle of July, but definitely before that August 10th deadline. And I see, Madam Chair, no reason that we can't stick to that timeline based on the incredible progress that we're making both with the community, with the redistricting committee, and the full board. So go to the next slide. This is just another graphical depiction of our timeline and what we've accomplished, including our community input meetings. And next slide, please. Just a reminder that we are finishing up our SMD meetings, which will complete this week. And we're constantly updating our website. That website not only has every presentation that we provided at a community meeting, but also every presentation that we've provided to the board or to the redistricting committee. So public, you can follow along with us. You can't make the meetings, you can't make the community meetings. You can go to the website and see that information and actually play our presentations back and as well provide input. On the website, we also have large zoomable maps that are even larger than our presentations or the zoomed in views. You can really zoom in to a fine point and look at any areas of interest that you may have. If you go to the next slide, this just provides for you all of the round 1 community forum dates that started February 16th and ended on and will end on April 6th, this Wednesday. The next slide were the round 2 community forum dates that we had built into the timeline, which if we don't have multiple maps out of this iteration, we won't be utilizing those round 2 community forum dates if we just have one map because we reached consensus sooner than we thought. But there will still be an opportunity for the public to comment on that map, both online and then at our June 8th special meeting, and then at the final meeting that's on June 29th, and even for the public to comment on June 16th when the Redistricting Committee hosts its meeting to make some final tweaks on that map. We go to the next slide. And again, we've spoken a lot about the redistricting website, which is constantly updated, and you can find that website at www.lonestar.edu/redistricting. And that just has a lot of information, including the maps that are being considered by the board. And again, presentations presented to the board, presented to the community, presented to the Redistricting Committee. So if you miss a meeting or are able to come to a forum, that's the best place to go for the most updated information because you can always replay those meetings and the presentations from that website. And again, that website also allows you to provide written feedback, and we monitor that closely. So please, if you have feedback about any of the maps or any of the presentations, please leave your comments there, and we will make sure that the Redistricting Committee gets those comments as well as the board. They take those comments into consideration when they're making recommendations for the next iteration of maps. And with that, Chair Saldivar, that concludes our presentation.
And I failed to mention earlier that the reason why typically we have our chairman and stuff in the district committee relevant here, but he's currently in flight, so he's not able to attend in person or virtually. But I'm here. I just want to say thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Paige, for so much for the presentation. It's really well. You educated us. Thank you so much. Rocky, thank you so much for joining us from Dallas. Is that correct? Are you in Dallas?
Yes, ma'am. We're close to it.
Let's do it. Thank you, Rocky.
Yep.
Then obviously our Lonestar Police deputies are always here every night during the forum. So thank you. And everyone who's here, thank you so much for doing this and being here. Lastly, with no further business to discuss, this public education forum is now adjourned at 6:47 p.m. on April 4th, 2022. The next special board meeting on redistricting is on April 13th, 2022. And the Redistricting Committee will hold a meeting on April 21st, 2022. Thank you so much. Good evening.